You guys take it away then.
Okay, Nancy, go ahead and get us started.
Okay, I am working on trying to get my screen shared.
Oh,
So
I can see your screen.
Yep.
Okay, fabulous. Okay, I just wanted to make sure that people could see it before I started talking about it. So hi everyone. So we're here to just give an overview on the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, or WIOA, and then offer an opportunity for people to ask questions that are still lingering out there in the field about this new law and our enactment of it in Wisconsin. And so WIOA is really about transition planning for students with disabilities who are 14 to 21 years of age and in an educational program. So either still receiving services from their public school or in a higher ed environment or job training environment. And then it's about providing transition services that are going to help those students move into employment and careers. And the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation, or DVR, where Sarah works, has an enhanced role now. And then there's also something called Section 511, which is about sub-minimum wage employment. So those are kind of the key pieces of WIOA that we're focusing on for this presentation. And the other important factor, I think, for anyone who works with educational services or voc rehab services to know is that for both DVR and DPI and the Transition Improvement Grant, we really see this as an opportunity to create more collaboration and coordination on behalf of youth and their families to launch them into employment and careers.
Great. Good summary. We want to go to the next slide.
So another piece of the background quickly is that the law was signed in July of 2014, and some portions, particularly those specific to the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation, went into effect immediately on the day that the law was signed. Some of the portions that were more pertinent to school services, they did not go into effect for 2 years. We actually had until July 22nd of 2016 to begin implementing, but that's been getting close, coming up on a year now that we've been implementing those portions as well.
Hey Nancy, this is Brenda. I'm not sure if everybody else is seeing. Your screen for us is still stuck on the first slide where it says enable editing.
Yep, that's where I am too. That's why I was like, next slide.
That's what I wondered. Okay, so we're gonna stop share for a minute.
Ours, in front of Pam and I, it was scrolling. So
Yeah.
we're
Yeah.
trying again.
I think that happened to us.
It was frozen on our end.
It was frozen, yeah. All right, we'll try again. Yeah, I wonder, you may need to share the PowerPoint and scroll it for us, Brenda. I don't know.
Yeah, it just keeps on saying that we're paused.
Yep, we keep on trying and it's not working.
I have it up, so just give me a second.
All right, give it a
Sorry
try.
about that, everyone.
Yep. It looked like it was working perfectly well on our end, so we're sorry.
And I was like, okay, next slide.
I was scrolling.
Okay, can you guys see my slide?
Yes.
Yep.
All right,
Are
so
you moving?
This
Yay!
is the one that you just went over.
we love technology when it works. Okay,
That's
so I
what I
think
do.
you had finished this slide.
Yep.
I did. I just reviewed that one. Correct.
Okay.
Okay. So Nancy talked about this a little bit in her brief overview. So the focus really is on youth, and it reinforces the collaboration, the interagency collaboration between DVR and the schools. And specifically, what we're going to talk about today is our role in transition to serve youth. So the student definition that Nancy already covered is that you have to be a student in high school or a educational training program, and you must be ages 14 to 21. And then there are very specific provisions of the law related to Section 511 that we'll get into a little bit later, where WIOA defines youth. And a youth is an individual with disabilities ages 14 to 24. So we know that all students are youth, but not all youth are students. And that's a really important distinction when we start talking about pre-employment transition services and some provisions under 511, and we'll get into that in a little bit. We wanted to let you know that these definitions are new and that they apply to different portions of the law. So another piece of WIOA, so what we are referring to, that the portion of the law that really governs the Rehab Act, which oversees the VR programs in the state, is Title IV. But WIOA actually touched several other titles, and there is impact on those programs as well. And so workforce investment program previously under WIA had a focus on in-school youth, and now with WIOA, their focus has been shifted a little bit to out-of-school youth. So some of our roles are being changed a little bit. Previously, VR was working with students, but now our role is really enhanced. So it's just to let you know that WIOA is broader than voc rehab and the collaboration and partnership that we have with schools, but we'll be focusing on Title IV today.
So could you go to the next slide, Brenda?
Yep. And I'm just going to take a quick second again. If for some reason people that are calling in, if you're not muting, it's supposed to mute on entry so we don't get much feedback. But if you could check your phone and just make sure that you're muted when you come in, that would be fabulous.
Thank you. Okay, so what is the congressional intent for transitioning youth under WIOA? We talked about this, that VR's role is to provide competitive, integrated employment opportunities, and it's in collaboration with schools prior to individuals being allowed to enter sub-minimum wage work. And this really is the provisions that we'll talk about under Section 511. So in order for an individual to go into sub-minimum wage employment now, they must come to DVR first. And again, that definition is for students. Oh, I'm sorry, it's for youth. This is a definition of a youth. So anyone 14 to 24 that wants to enter sub-minimum wage employment must come to DVR first. And it really gives VR an enhanced role to serve youth earlier in high school. We've always been serving youth in Wisconsin since our VR program was established, but we are now required to spend a specific amount of our federal grant providing some very specific services to students while they are in school. So again, we know that that was the congressional intent, that VR reaches those students earlier, and that we also are involved in individuals before they enter sub-minimum wage work. And then Nancy or Pam is going to take the next bullet.
So an important point for schools and educators is that IDEA didn't change at all. That law has not been reauthorized yet. We do anticipate that as reauthorization for IDEA is planned over the next year or two, depending on what happens at the federal level, that some of the components from WIOA will be embedded in those revisions. But basically, WIOA tells us and states explicitly that none of the transition planning and service requirements that were already in IDEA, none of those changed. And so the requirements that we have for indicator 13, which are all found in our post-secondary transition plan or PTP, none of those changed under WIOA, but we did have some added responsibilities in terms of providing transition services and free and appropriate public education to students with disabilities under WIOA. But it didn't eliminate or remove or reduce any of the requirements that were already in place for schools. And so what were those? For just a quick recap for those of you who are participating today, that IEP teams need to support students with disabilities to have a post-school goal, one for education and training and one for employment in place. And in Wisconsin, that requirement begins by the time a student is 14 years of age. the third type of post-school goal that is found in IDEA is one for independent living. Right now, IDEA leaves that as an optional goal. We strongly recommend that teams consider independent living as a need for all students with disabilities, because we know that teenagers with and without disabilities alike have a need to plan for independent living. And then that those goals for after high school have to be based on the results of an age-appropriate transition assessment and include the student's strengths and interests. And also that the school and IEP team need to determine a course of study for the student each year. Another best practice that we talk about is having a course of study laid out starting as a freshman for the entire 4 years. Like everything else in the plan, that can be revised annually, but that if there's a course of study that's set for 4 years, then the student and the family understand the requirements, not only for graduation, but hopefully courses that the student is also choosing that may be aligned with career and job interests. And then based on that information, school teams talk about transition services that the student needs to be successful in moving toward their post-school goals and accomplishing annual goals. And then in terms of those annual goals, at least one of them needs to be connected to support the post-school goals. And we do find that, you know, movement toward graduation and doing well in classes and being involved in the school community are all usually related. So sometimes school staff and teachers worry about that. And typically when we look at those through the Transition Improvement Grant, we find that there's good alignment, but that's something that teams have to think about. So what do we know that's new or different from WIOA? Well, really, there were 3 main shifts for schools. And I'm happy to report that the face on the chicken I'm seeing less and less of as I go out and present, and Sarah and I and other folks from DVR and Pam present to people. People are adjusting it. It always takes a little while with new information, but I'm glad to say I think that this information has gotten out and that most school districts are now following it, but we still have best practice advice that we're developing based on input from schools and VR staff.
So as Nancy said, there's 3 main shifts for schools. First one, strengthening collaboration with DVR. It's so important that we make sure that we are connecting schools and DVR together, that youth ages 14 to 24 can no longer go directly from school to employment that is sub-minimum wage. So as Sarah said previously, that we need to make sure that we have those connections and informing families and youth regarding this change in law. And again, just making sure that DVR students and families are all connected during the process of their school year. We want to look at also connecting those students 2 years prior to graduation at the minimum. So making sure that they're connected with DVR then. The second provision is pre-employment transition services. So WIOA tells us that schools are responsible for pre-eds in collaboration with DVR. So one of the things that TIG and DPI worked on is developing a new transition services list for the PTP. So I'm sure for the educators on the call, you've noticed that at the beginning of the year that those pre-eds or transition services changed. And the reason that we did that is the obvious reason to align them with pre-eds, but also to make it a student and family friendly document for everyone to participate in IEP, PTP meetings. And then again, students and families just need to know this process too and this information. So making sure you're sharing that list with families, even providers, to talk about what kind of skills students need to go on to the next steps for transition. Next slide, please.
Okay, so I mentioned that one of the congressional intents is for DVR to serve youth earlier in high school, and that there was a specific dollar amount that we are required to set aside in order to provide these services. And so these are the categories of services, and they are titled Pre-Employment Transition Services, or pre-ETS. Previous, maybe about a year ago, you may have heard them being referred to as pets, but we are calling them pre-ets now. So that was a bit of a change, but they're the same thing. So there are, for DVR, there are 5 specific categories of services that we must spend a specific pot of dollars on. And the first one is job exploration counseling. And that really is a service where our counselors are sitting down and talking to our consumers and asking them about different options for jobs based on their interests and skills. It can also be where we're doing, sending them out for an assessment to try to determine what their area of interest is. So that's job exploration. Work-based learning experiences are opportunities where individuals are actually on the job learning different kinds of skills that help them towards their employment goal. So a work-based learning experience could be project search. That's a really good example of a work-based learning experience. Counseling on opportunities for transition or post-secondary education or higher education programs. Again, that one is where oftentimes this is our staff that are doing this role. They're talking to them about what kinds of training programs are required in order to reach their employment goal. Workplace readiness is a training to develop social skills and independent living, and those can be done in your home or in community. And those kinds of things are programs like Skills to Pay the Bills is a good example of a workplace readiness, where they're talking about all of the things that you need to learn in order to be ready for work. So things like personal hygiene, showing up on time, what to wear to work, things like that. The last one is instruction and self-advocacy, which may include peer mentoring. So it really is all around getting the individual self-confident and ready to advocate for what their needs are in the workplace. So that could be asking for an accommodation or talking to your boss about needing a day off, things like that. So those are the pre-employment transition service categories that we are required to provide in collaboration with schools. So ladies, do you want to go ahead and talk about it from the school side?
Sure. So if we can go back, thank you, Brenda. One thing that we like for everyone to recognize is there are 5 pre-ets with DVR, and from the school side, we've broken that into 6. With number 4, workplace readiness, we've broken that down into home and community. So those are 2 separate components on our list. And with the webinar, you should have received attachment also that has the transition services document. That explains what each of those 6 areas means as far as education, and then provides a list in each of those areas of different activities that can be done during the time frame the person is in school to prepare them for life after school.
And I think the only other thing that I have to add about this is that we know from an extended period of time of research that for all students with disabilities, that number 2, the work-based learning experiences is really critical. And so I think as, DVR continues to be involved in the lives of more and more students, and also as schools implement academic and career planning next year and add internships and opportunities for students to be out in places of employment in their communities, if not working, then at least getting experiences going into businesses and taking tours and doing informational interviews and really learning about what different workplaces are like and what different jobs entail, that we know that that's going to be a stronger focus for both the school side and the VR side. So I would just say that that's something that we are looking to build programs throughout the state in all communities to have students, out actually in businesses. So I just wanted to share that that's an emphasis, because we know that that tends to be the strongest predictor of the future employment.
Great. Okay, pre-employment transition services, how are they provided? So I mentioned that we're required to set aside a specific amount of dollars in order to provide pre-employment transition services. And it's actually 15% of our entire federal grant amount must be spent providing pre-ETS to students. So in federal fiscal year 2017, that was about $9.7 million. And again, this is not new money for VR. It really is just taking our entire pie and slicing it so that 15% of that is then specifically set aside for pre-ed services to students. So if we don't spend our 15% in the current fiscal year that we are in, then the requirement to spend whatever is remaining rolls over into the next year. And again, it is the requirement to spend, it is not the new money. So if we only spend $8.7 million on pre-employment transition services in this federal fiscal year, then next year we need to spend 15% of our allocation plus $1 million. And again, so that just means that the percent increases that we must spend on pre-eds. It's no new money, and no money is actually carried over from one federal fiscal year to the other. So really, it was really the congressional intent that VR is very intentional about providing these services to students. And it was very, very specific around how much money we are required to spend on those services. So that is just that's a big change for VR. And we, in the first year, so when the law was enacted in July of 2014, we did not have the final rules in place yet. So we were tracking our pre-employment transition services according to how we interpreted the law. And then when we did get the final rules, some of what we were counting ended up not counting, and some things that we weren't counting, we found out we could. So in the first year, unfortunately, we did not meet our goal. And so on the last federal fiscal year, so federal fiscal year 16, we did achieve our goal, and we were able to spend the entire amount that we needed to spend on pre-employment transition services. But because we didn't spend what we should have in federal fiscal year 15, we were carrying over, and we are carrying over some requirement to spend dollars from that specific year. And right now, we are ahead of schedule from where we were last year in order to spend our pre-employment transition service dollars. So we're really hopeful that we're going to be able to spend our 15% plus really spend additional dollars so that we are able to get on track. And moving forward into federal fiscal year 18, we're hopeful that we will be just spending that 15% and rolling forward spending that 15%. We do feel strongly about providing services to students. However, we are an adult employment program as well. And so we need to make sure that the remaining 85% of our federal allocation is spent providing other services outside of pre-employment transition services. So we also talked about how they are provided in collaboration with the schools. And so again, the definition here of a student is listed. They are ages 14 to 21 in high school or a post-secondary educational training program. So it really is important that VR is in the schools on a regular basis, that staff know who they are, that we are connecting students 2 years prior to them exiting school to VR services. And I believe that Pam already mentioned, or Nancy mentioned, that the transition services listed in the PTP are really the pre-employment transition services. So it really is a collaboration. We no longer are in a situation where we can't provide the same services to a student. So it really is encouraged under WIOA that schools and VR work together and provide whatever it is that that student needs. So an example would be if a student has a job while they are during the school day, and that student needs supports while they are participating in the school day around that job, then it really is the school's responsibility to pick up and pay for that support while they're in school. Now, if the student wants to do an after-school job or have a summer work-based learning experience, then that really is where VR can pick up and pay for those kinds of services. So what that really indicates is that there needs to be really good communication and collaboration for all of the team members that wrap around a student to provide pre-employment transition services, so that we are doing the very best we can to help those students explore different opportunities around employment and really help them get their first jobs while they're in school, so that they have a really good head start on employment when they leave. We also are continuing to use the Transition Action Guide as a tool to talk about cost sharing. And that document is in the process of being updated to reflect all of the new changes under WIOA. But one of the main guidelines within that Transition Action Guide is referring students to VR 2 years prior to exiting, and that we do not intend to change that. Now, that doesn't mean that a student that needs VR services sooner than that can't access our services. There really is no minimum age. However, we really want to encourage, as best practice, is that we see them at least 2 years prior. Now, VR counselors can attend IEP meetings prior to a student actually enrolling in DVR, and we strongly encourage that. The VR counselor can talk to the student and the team about the different services that VR can provide once the student is ready for our services. But again, really it's about collaboration and all of us coming together around helping the student be the most successful that they can be in reaching their employment goal.
So we just talked quite a bit about pre-employment transition services and the collaboration, but if you were counting from the slide with the chicken that said that there were 3 main shifts for schools, this third one is about purchasing transition services. And so it is allowable for IDEA and other education funding to be spent to contract out for transition services. A lot of times that might be with a local vocational support provider or what schools sometimes call a vendor. And so there are some new rules though under WIOA about what can and can't be purchased. Next slide. And so what WIOA tells us is that schools cannot contract with providers or vendors for the purpose of purchasing transition services that include training the student on work that's typically paid at a sub-minimum wage. And so providers of employment support services, some of them we have historically called them sheltered workshops. Now they typically are referred to as CRPs or community rehab providers. But if a community rehab provider has a 14C license or special wage certificate and pays some of its workers sub-minimum wage, schools have to pay attention to what kinds of services they're contracting for to ensure that the student is never being trained on work where it's the student is being paid a sub-minimum wage or the people sitting or standing around him or her are being paid a sub-minimum wage, because WIOA prohibits that. The intent is that students will receive services that are community-based for integrated competitive employment and not work paid at sub-minimum wage. And so that's what schools are told we need to do and can't contract out for services that are otherwise also. There is a link in this PowerPoint to the CRPs in our state that have those 14C licenses. Now, it does not mean that schools can't contract with those places. They can, as long as the services being provided to the student support community-based integrated employment. So, and any questions about that, myself or Pam or any of the TIG coordinators are happy to answer. And so these are some of the questions that we've gotten over the past 2 years as we've gone out to talk about WIOA. So even if the vendor or CRP offers to pay the student minimum wage, the contract still can't happen between the school and the vendor. Or if the student is working fast enough at that piece rate work that the work is being paid at a sub-minimum wage, but the student is doing it fast enough that they're earning a minimum wage or higher, that's still not allowable. And it's also not allowable if the student volunteers to be trained on that work. The school cannot pay for it in any of those cases.
So what we do encourage is if any of those agencies or vendors are supporting students in the community, in community-based integrated employment, we do encourage you to work with those vendors and get students those types of experiences out in the community. So we are not by any means discouraging that partnership. We're looking at community-based services.
Okay, so what does Section 511 mean for students? This is a federal law, and we always want to make sure that we mention that. These are not state requirements, although we are required to implement WIOA the way that it is written, but DVR and DPI did not create this law. It really is a federal law that came down under WIOA. And students who may have opted to go directly from high school to sheltered work or any kind of work that is paying sub-minimum wage under a 14C certificate will no longer be able to do so unless several requirements are met. And the very first requirement is that they must seek out and apply for DVR services. And so when they need to come to DVR, they need to go through the eligibility process and have an individualized plan for employment developed. And really it is the intent that DVR will work very hard to find the right job match for an individual to have competitive integrated employment in the community. So really that is the goal of DVR under Section 511, and it really is the intent that we give youth the opportunity to explore different areas of work and to support them in doing that. And so we know this is a big change because for some families, they had had a trajectory for a very long time, perhaps since their child was very young, that they were going to be going into sub-minimum wage work. And really, the intent of the law is to give those individuals an opportunity to experience what it is like to work in the community just like everybody else. And so we know that students and families need to be educated about these changes, and this is why we do presentations like the one that we're doing today. And over the past year and a half, we have been around the state and actually even at conferences outside of Wisconsin, really talking about this change, how it impacts our families and our consumers, and how we can all work together in order to implement the law and to do it in a way that is really informative and helpful for our consumers and their families. So we know that there are still families and students out there that are not aware of these changes, and so we are continuing to do outreach and education around WIOA and specifically around 511 because it does have a really big impact on some of our families. So there are actually two pieces of Section 511 under WIOA that impact DVR. The one is what I just spoke about, the fact that a youth cannot enter sub-minimum wage employment without coming to DVR first. But what about those individuals that were already working for sub-minimum wage when this provision of the law went into effect, which was July of 2016? There is a portion of WIOA that requires DVR to kind of be, to provide really good information and opportunities for individuals that are already working in sub-minimum wage. So DVR is required to coordinate with sub-minimum wage license holders, so these CRPs basically, to do reviews for individuals that are currently working under sub-minimum wage. And if it is their first year in that kind of employment, they will receive 2 reviews from DVR and then annually thereafter. And for anyone that as of July 22nd, 2016 was there for more than a year, they will get an annual review. So DVR put out an RFP, a request for proposal, and we selected a provider in order to go out and do these reviews for us. So many of you may have heard that UW Whitewater was the selected vendor, and they are doing the annual outreach and review service for us. So you may have heard about them coming into CRPs and providing these reviews, and the feedback that we have gotten so far from them is that the reviews have all gone, for the most part, very well, that individuals are interested in the information that we're sharing. Basically, we are talking to them about employment opportunities in their community, talking to them about how they can apply for VR if that's something that they are interested in doing, and really talking to them about what are their employment goals, and could they be and would they be interested in working out in the community, and giving them an opportunity to learn about those kinds of things. So those are ongoing, and that's a provision of the law that is in place. So it started in July of 2016, and so DVR will have this role ongoing for as long as WIOA is under law the way that it is written today. So that's a big shift for us. And we're really hopeful that as a result of some of these reviews, that individuals that didn't have the opportunity to learn about employment opportunities are learning about them. Now, that doesn't mean that individuals that are currently working in those environments, that doesn't mean that they have to leave. It just is an opportunity for them to learn. So an individual may go through a review and say, thank you very much. I understand this information. I thank you for sharing that with me, but I'm going to continue my employment here, earning some minimum wage in this environment. And that really that's the choice of that individual, and they can certainly do that. So there is some myths out there that when DVR was coming in to do the reviews that individuals could no longer work there. And that really is not the intent of the law. It really is to provide really good education and opportunities to learn about other opportunities besides sub-minimum wage employment. And so that is a really important part of what DVR needs to do under Section 511.
So some best practices under WIOA, which are similar to best practices that we would have talked about even prior to WIOA, but WIOA has brought them even more into the limelight, that career exploration that I talked about. So in Wisconsin, a couple of things I just want to highlight that we have going on that we really hope that schools and school teams in conjunction with DVR are looking at for students. One of them is called Youth Apprenticeship, or YA. So you'll see that listed on the top bullet. And the Youth Apprenticeship Program is operated through the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation and the Department of Workforce Development, but also in collaboration with DPI. And we'd like to grow the number of students with identified disabilities who are applying. The application process is in the spring, and the application deadlines vary from school district to school district, but we definitely would like to encourage school teams to help students look at that. The other thing that is a growing option in Wisconsin is project search. Sarah mentioned that earlier. We, among us, Pam, Sarah, and myself, we've been to several project search graduations this week, and it was highlighted again for us at these graduation ceremonies that the majority of the graduates from the 9-month program have jobs before they even finish up. And so they're all going straight from this project search training program or internship program into employment in the community. And so we just wanted to highlight those two pieces. Promise is a grant project that's been happening in Wisconsin that also is focused on employment outcomes and helping students and their families get jobs and get off of public benefits. So we have some great things going on in our state. We also recommend the use of a variety of assessment tools. Way back at the beginning of the presentation, we talked about the fact that post-school goals for students must be based on the results of age-appropriate transition assessment. And so it's hard to get a good set of results and good data from just one type of assessment. We also strongly encourage experiential assessment, or what WIOA calls the discovery process. And that's been around for a while, but it's basically experiential assessment to figure out what students like and don't like and what kinds of environments work best for them. We also strongly encourage student leadership in transition planning. We recently launched a transition planning app, and the information about that can be found on the Transition Improvement Grant website. But that's another great way to help support students to look at careers and jobs that they want, is to actually get them involved in selecting what's in their transition plan and moving toward that. Family engagement is very important. We know that the greater the degree of family engagement, the more likely students are to work in high school and beyond high school. And so we want to help get families not just at IEP meetings, but actually participating. Families, in addition to our demo site for our PTP, family members can also use the transition planning app. It's free to anyone, so they could also provide their input through that method. Introducing students and families to DVR and providers. So this one is incredibly important, according to focus groups that have been done with students and family members, that rather than just getting written information from schools about the DVR counselor and DVR services and local providers, students and family members tell us that they really, really want a face-to-face introduction. It's something that sometimes is also referred to as a warm handoff, so that people, teachers who students and families know and trust, are actually making direct introductions to adult service providers and VR counselors. And then I've already talked about the last bullet a couple times, but just can't stress enough that getting students out of the school building is really the most important thing you can do for job and career exploration.
Okay, DVR transition best practices, using the tag and referring students 2 years prior to graduation. Rapid engagement of services. So this is something that VR is working really hard towards. It is really, once an individual comes to VR, it is going right away on work experiences and on the job trainings and things like that. So just engaging individuals right away so that they are interested in the process and really engage. The other one is having DVR office hours at school, and we talked about that with everyone getting to know who their VR people are, so that there is a relationship built when they're ready to engage and apply for services. Making it convenient for families, so changing some of our counselor hours so that they are able to be at things like job fairs and parent-teacher conference nights and things like that, so that we are really around when families have time to engage with us. The coordination of the IEP, which is the school, or the IEP PTP, which is the school plan, and the IPE. Again, we talked about the importance of the team working around the student and making sure that we are collaborating around the services that we are providing to them. Summer work experiences provided by DVR. It's a great time for students to have work experiences, just like many other students do during the summer. And we're working really hard to enhance those services that we can provide to students during the summer. And again, providing supports on the job for after school, weekends, and summer jobs. So we talked about those already as well.
Right. And I would say, Sarah, it was great that Sarah kind of highlighted the having DVR counselor office hours at the schools. That's something that both DPI and DVR are talking about a lot out in the field. So we're really hoping that through the local area offices and local school districts, that more and more of that will be happening. It happens regularly in some places already, but we're hoping that it happens more and more over time. So we are at about 4:15. So Brenda, I just want to check with you and see, do you want to play one of the videos quickly as a demonstration for people, or would you like to move right on to the question and answer portion?
Let me double check. We hadn't had any questions come through the chat. So what I think I'll do is just kind of jump in here. I'd want to make sure that we do get questions answered. So if no one has questions, we can certainly go into the video if that makes sense.
Sure. And people can always, since Lisa Van Dyke, the Transition Improvement Grant support person, sent out the PowerPoint, and so you can always watch. These are 3 brief videos that provide good examples of students working and their teachers and DVR and providers collaborating to help make that happen. So they're brief, but they're all really fun and good, and so you can always watch those on your own if we don't get a chance to do it during the presentation.
And I think if people don't, if they don't want to type in a question, you can certainly go ahead and unmute yourself if you have a question. I think we've got a small enough group. No questions. So is there a particular one you'd want to show, Nancy?
Well, let's see. Let's just start with the top one. And all of these are kind of fun because they have like great backstory. So we can do the first one and then see how we're doing after that.
All right, I'm trying to get this to open.
Okay.
There we go.
My name is Brandon, and I work at Stop.
I can't hear it.
Yeah, I don't know why we lost sound. It was working okay.
Letter cards, and that helps him. It helps him.
Huh.
Let me try this again.
Okay. You're not muted, right, Brenda?
You could hear it at first?
Yes.
I hear it at first and then it stopped.
All right, I'll go back to my name is Brandon.
I work at Stockpile. I sort the games. I restock games. I put games in the face.
Brandon is a very visual person. We started him off with a picture schedule of tasks, which has been faded out. We put in another accommodation, letter cards, and that helps him to sort the games alphabetically. It helps him be very independent.
My family helped me do me working.
Since working at Stockpile, he's learned to be more organized, punctual. Brandon has blossomed work-wise and also socially.
When not working, I do social limits. I go with my friends. I go when I do go with my girlfriend.
Brandon is going to be exiting school in another year, and our goal then is to help him by possibly developing something maybe at the library or some other place of employment that builds on those skills that he already has gotten through his work experience opportunities, something that will be appropriate, something that he will enjoy, and that he can keep for the long term.
Someday I will get my own job. I want to get paid. And then I can do stuff on my own.
My hopes for Brandon after he graduates is that he can continue to do a job that he loves. I hope to see him living life like any other person in their early 20s.
I'm a good worker. I'm on time. I didn't work hard.
So just to fill in a little bit of that backstory that I mentioned earlier, Brandon is from Manitowoc, Wisconsin, and he worked on developing his own career goals through his PTP process and kept saying for a couple of years, I really want to work with video games. I really want to work with video games. And so at the point in time when it was appropriate, his teacher helped Brandon and his mom apply for DVR services, who then brought in the provider that we saw, the job developer, who helped him get a paid work experience at the video game store. And so after that experience of building his resume and having an employer who was willing to support him, he was able to go on and get a job at Walmart in his community and a couple of other places. And so I've heard that since graduation that Brandon is doing well, and that was a great launching off point for him, and it was a really good collaboration between the area provider, DVR, and the school to build off of his interests and strengths and then support him to be as independent as possible at that work experience. So it's just one example of, you know, a situation that everybody's path is different, but that's one way to make it happen is when the school is working on planning and then brings all their partners in to the decision making and the outreach to employers to figure out how to get kids experience.
Very cool. All right, well, I still don't see any chat, so if anybody has any last minute questions, jump in now. Otherwise, I know Pam, Nancy, Sarah, and any of your TIG coordinators can also answer questions if you have specific ones that you don't want to ask today. Okay, I think our contact information slide is next.
Yep.
So if you wanted to get in touch specifically with Nancy or Sarah, here are their phone numbers and emails. And I am just going to show you quickly in case you don't know. I will go out to our TIG site. I'm guessing if most of you know who your TIG coordinator is, but if not, if you go to the, where are we? Contact us under About TIG. That will have all of the regional coordinators in the areas that they cover too. So, all right.
So, hey, would you like to really quickly pull up the app information and just show people where to find that too, in case people haven't seen that yet and they're interested in checking it out?
Of course I would. And that actually makes me think of something. Nancy or Lisa had sent out the WIOA for families along with the PREETs. We also have a specific section on our website. Have you heard about WIOA? So if there's anything that you saw today, most of everything that we've done through the Department of Public Instruction or TIG will be found here. And under that same heading, the TIG projects, is the app that Nancy mentioned. So a couple things with the app. It is now officially accessible on iTunes and Google Play, but you can also use it just on a regular laptop. If you can go to the, click on the link and it'll just take you to the platform, and you can use it just like you would as a regular kind of online platform. So start a PTP, and then it walks you through, I think it's 15 pages of questions. And it's, I think Nancy might have mentioned this, but it's definitely geared for our youth of Wisconsin, but we would certainly encourage family members to fill one out. I actually had one parent at a conference say to me that, yeah, she'd love to do one, but she also knows she holds her son back, so she was going to have her son's siblings all fill one out, just so she would have kind of varying perspectives. I thought that was a pretty cool idea. Did you want, Nance, did you want to go through any of it, or we've got 425 now?
Yeah, I think maybe just go back to the TIG projects, to the app section here, just down below. Actually, and Brenda was really instrumental in this, in just helping to create a set of resources to go with the app to give teachers and students and family members ideas and tips around it. So it does, for any student who completes the app, at the end, they get there's a report generated, and it's all in first person, which is really neat. It's basically, this is a report about me, and they can email it, they can print it out right away, they can download it and save it, they can email it to themselves, a parent, a teacher, anybody that they want. And so it really, and the information that the report generates is intended to align directly with what needs to go in the PTP, so that a student can use it to lead their meeting, and then the teacher could use it to fill in the PTP and have the official plan that goes to DPI match what the student really says they want.
And just kind of go along with this webinar too, I know Sarah and Nancy both mentioned the pre-employment transition services. In the app, you'll see kind of a summarized version of those, but what gets fed into the final report here are the actual PREETs that you'll see in the PTP as a teacher, so the post-secondary transition plan. So all of these then will align with what you'll see in your document too. So it's just kind of a nice connection to the two the 2 applications. And then a couple other things, I'll just point out a couple of things and then we'll get going. We do have a tips for use. One of the things with the app is you do realize one size never fits all. But what we do in our world is we accommodate and we modify as needed, right? So there's just some tips based off of feedback that we've gotten from people in the field. Like you might want to front load some of the vocabulary. One of the other tips is that to be able to use a text-to-speech writer, I've used the Read and Write extension and that works great. I know another school that I work with uses Snap and Read, but we were also told too on your phone, all of our smartphones are built in with those accessibility features. So that's just kind of another perk. And then the last thing I will show here is we also have a Google community that we really want people that are using it to be able to go to and ask questions and share outcomes and ideas because I think we all learn best from each other. So lots of good stuff on there. So I think we will wrap up. I'm just peeking at the chats one more time and don't see anything, but again, feel free. That doesn't mean you can't reach out if you walk away and have questions as you leave. So I just want to thank Nancy, Sarah, and Pam again for taking time to give us kind of the WIOA 101 plus more.
Absolutely. Thank you for saying
Thank you, Brenda. Thanks everyone for listening.
Yeah, thanks for coming in.
Full information. Let us know if you have questions.
All right. Thanks for joining us. Take care.
Bye. Thanks, everyone.